everywhere. Lawmakers know Rich Herrera is watching.
This is Richmond's Morning News with Rich Herrera on News Radio WRVA.
News Radio WRVA time is 8:33. You're listening to Richmond's Morning News with me, Rich Herrera. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. A lot of what we talk about on a daily basis is the economy. How much is the price of gasoline? Why is Wall Street in the Dow going through the roof, but my roof is falling down around my house? And even if I have a house. So let's try to make heads or tails of this. I need some help. So we're going to go out to the Newsmaker hotline for News Radio WRVA. We're going to invite on John Gibbs. He's the director of the Thomas A. Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies from the Heritage Foundation. And he's our special guest here on News Radio WRVA. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Rich.
I appreciate you taking time joining us. When I was getting ready to talk to you, I noticed you went to Stanford, you went to Harvard. So I want to start there. You look at Palo Alto, where you went to undergrad. Palo Alto is a wonderful city, very expensive. I can never afford to live there. I live down the street, El Camino Real, more further south than Stanford because I couldn't afford to live next to the campus. But then you look across the street to East Palo Alto, and it was absolutely destitute over there. That's kind of how I feel a lot of people in America look at us right now that are Americans. There's a lot of great places. I just can't afford to buy a house right now. There's a lot of places where people don't have that pride of home ownership. Tell us right now, if in what you're seeing and what you guys are talking about at Heritage, why does it seem so difficult and people are giving up on that dream of buying their first home?
Well, yeah, I mean, things have gotten so expensive, it's crazy. And one of the things that's not often talked about is all the things that the federal government has done to make housing so expensive. 80% of mortgages in our country are backed by the government. And just like when the government backs student loans, it makes college more expensive. When the government backs home loans, it makes homes more expensive. We're seeing the same dynamic at play. So when the government gives out credit at a much higher degree than the market can bear, people can buy much more expensive houses than they would be able to otherwise under a free market. This causes housing to become very expensive. And over the years, over the decades, this has compounded and made housing way out of reach for most people. So this is one of the key drivers you have at play. The second one, which people don't really talk about this issue in the context of housing so much, is illegal immigration. We know that under Joe Biden, we saw millions and millions of people come here illegally, and all those folks have to have a place to live. So now you have a physics problem. You have to have enough housing for all the people we're bringing in. That causes an increase in demand and an increase in prices. So you see a very significant impact, especially on the East Coast and the West Coast, especially in California, where you live and where I used to live. Immigration has a very, very large impact in driving up housing prices. So those are two of the 800-pound gorillas in the room that people don't talk about as much, but are perhaps the biggest two issues that have, over the past decades, really made housing very expensive.
Okay, so let me make sure I recap this for everybody. And I'm kicking myself for not realizing this. Just like with student loans, too many dollars chasing too few goods is going to drive up the cost of education. So what we're saying here is, we're talking about Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. I believe we're talking about the government backing these home loans. So if 80% of them are credit that's extended by the United States of America, that means we're flooding credit. We're driving up the prices. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. Then when you add in the bodies that we brought in to the United States of America, they have to have some place to live. That means they're taking up rental space. That means they're taking up homes. That means they're taking up domiciles, which means we have less availability to have places for people to live. So we've actually limited the amount of available real estate out there and put too much money in there. Therefore, housing prices go through the roof. Listen, I didn't go to Stanford, but that's economics 101, isn't it?
It is, Rich. I love that you recap it so well. That's exactly right. And just to frame the context, the total value of mortgages that the United States government insures or guarantees is about $10 trillion. That's 1/3 of our GDP. Even the Soviet Union during the height of communism didn't have that much involvement in their housing market. But that's what we do here in America. There's nowhere else on earth, with the exception of communist China. They run their whole housing market because they're communists. But putting China aside, there is no other country on earth that has as socialist of a housing market for mortgages as we do.
Well, one of the things I also noticed, so I bought my very first home. It was a little tiny house, like 1,000 square feet, but it was the first home I ever put roots down and I bought, and that was in St. Petersburg, Florida, when I was in baseball down there, and it was a little tiny house, but that was our first starter house. I notice now I don't see starter homes. Is that because we've got so much money flooding the market? You don't see that first home that you buy, and then you move into your second, and then by the time you have grandkids, you have a really nice house. I don't see that path in America anymore.
That's precisely correct, because there is so much money out there and so much credit availability backed by the government that it lets people buy much more expensive houses than they would have been able to do otherwise. And since the builders make higher profit margins on more expensive houses, they're not going to build lower priced houses if they can get away with it. So because the government enables them to build expensive houses, enables people to get high mortgages to buy those expensive houses, the builders have no incentives to any longer build lower priced starter homes. They're receiving fewer and fewer of those.
And I look at it as well. The cost of everything from the rising wages means that the cost of labor is going up, the regulations. It makes it ridiculous. All right, John, I got to ask you this question. This is a serious question. I look at what my wife watches on TV, and she'll watch HGTV, and you see all these kids walking in, and they're a 20-year-old kid, and they're looking at a $2.5 million house. I think it also kind of has people skewed of, okay, what do we really afford? Because when you watch some of these things, I think people have these misconceptions and dreams of, well, this should be my first house. I should have a house as great as my parents have, even though they've worked 30 years to earn this house.
Well, yes. I mean, there is some truth to that. People have to have realistic expectations in whatever they're going to, whether that's the job they get. People expecting to make $500,000 on a first job out of college is not realistic. Anyone expecting to buy a $2 million house as your first home, that's of course not realistic. That being said, there is some truth to the fact that a house is much more expensive now for a young person than it was for a young person, say, in 1980.
Right.
The ratio of income to house price, house price to income, usually it's around 3.0 or so. Now it's like 6. The amount of money you need in order to buy a house is much higher now. Your monthly payment relative to your overall income is much higher. So it is much harder for the young people today to be able to afford a house than it was in the past. But yes, people do need to have realistic expectations. That is something we're seeing out there. People need to be connected to reality.
And I bring this up because when we had our little 1,000-square beach house, it was fine. It was tiny, but there's only 3 of us. It didn't matter. No kids are going to want that right now because they look at what they see on social media. They see what they see on cable television. Go, well, I wouldn't have a little house like that. I remember we had a friend of my son's came over and he looked and he goes, Mr. Herrera, why is your house so little compared to mine? And my son was embarrassed. I go, here's why. I'd rather be cash rich than house poor. We want to be able to do things. We didn't overextend ourselves to the house. And I'd explain that to my son. We were going to be pragmatists when it came to buying our first house. We'll get a bigger house later, but this is what we do to start. But I think there's so many kids out there right now that only see the 4-bedroom, 3-car garage house. And if they can't afford that, then they say, well, there's no such thing as the American dream. I'll never get a home.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the average square footage of a new house today is something like 2,300 square feet, I believe.
Wow.
Whereas if you go back to like 1975, 1980, it was something like 1,500 square feet. So the average square footage of a house being built today is far, far, far bigger than it was in the past. And I think that helps to give people unrealistic expectations, of how big of a house they want. So yeah, that is a trend we've been seeing in home construction.
John Gibbs joining us right now from the Heritage Foundation as we talk about economics and housing. He worked at HUD and he's got an extensive background. Can I ask you one question that we get all the time?
Sure.
We talk all the time about how great the Dow's doing. We saw record Dow numbers and we see record numbers on Wall Street and Wall Street's doing great. But for my street, what do you see? Because a lot of people feel like there's a disconnect. Oh, look, Elon Musk just became a trillionaire. Wall Street's on fire right now, but I haven't felt it in my house on my street. What would you say?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, when you look at the market right now, a lot of companies are showing good profits. A lot of companies are beating their earnings estimates. So you do see a lot of positive news from the companies in terms of their fundamental numbers. You see a lot of AI investment, which is creating some earnings growth as well. So you do see on the corporate side and the companies that are out in the stock market, you see them reporting good numbers. However, we don't necessarily see this making its way down to Main Street. So I would argue one of the reasons for this, and one of the 800-pound gorillas, is if you look at the conversations around the H-1B visa program, you see a very large number of companies that would rather, expand their visa program and pay people coming here a much lower salary than they would have to pay an American citizen and expand that way instead of hiring more Americans or increasing the wages of their American workers. So I think that's one issue you see. You see things like stock buybacks, which, are a very controversial practice, where the companies buy back their stocks in order to increase those. And whenever they do that, every dollar they're spending, they're not spending on increasing wages and hiring more Americans. So we have a couple of structural problems here that we really need to have a conversation about nationally, that are stopping this growth in the stock market from really making its way to Main Street.
It's interesting. I don't want to misrepresent who the Silicon Valley company was, but they laid off like 20,000 workers. And then the next day asked for 20,000 of those visas, bringing in people to do the same job that they just terminated from American workers. So it's 100%. Okay, Dave, I want to go over just 1 second because I got to ask John this question. We're seeing the Strait of Hormuz opening up. We see the oil prices look like they've come down from the $100 a barrel, $78, what I saw yesterday, and we'll continue to see them drop. When do you think, how long will it take for us to see real significant changes at the pump? It seems like the prices shot up overnight, but they're a little sticky coming back down the other way.
That's a very good point. Even if the Straits of Hormuz were 100% open today, which it's not, the shipping companies are saying they're going to be very cautious. They're not going to start moving their ships through right away. So it's going to take a long time. But even if we're open today, it's going to take weeks and months for all this stuff to cascade through the system. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at record low levels. When that happens, it makes it easier for the price of gas to shoot up. So it's going to take into next year, most likely, for those to start to get back to normal. The price of gasoline, about half of it is made up from the price of crude oil. So the price of global crude oil has a huge impact on the price of gasoline. And although the overall barrel value has come down to like, what is it, 78 or whatever it is, that still takes time to cascade its way through the system. And when crude oil goes up, gas prices go up fast, but when it goes down, the gas prices come down slower. And so on the way back down, it always is slower. That's what you tend to see when you look at the trends on this. So I think we're looking at least several months potentially for things to get back to normal. And that's assuming that the deal goes through and there's no disruptions, which we don't quite know of as of yet.
John, this has been fascinating. I'm kicking myself that I didn't realize about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I'm making a note. I'm going to put that in my pocket. I appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you start coming on as a regular. This is fascinating. And I think you opened a lot of eyes today on some of the things that we see going on and made some sense of a lot today. So I'd welcome you back anytime you want to come back on the program.
Thanks, Rich. I really appreciate having me on and would very much love to come back on again.
If we were there, I used to live in Palo Alto where you went to school. I would take, if this is such a good interview, I would offer to take you to the Goose when we're all said and done. So if we're ever in the Bay Area together, I'm going to take you to the Dutch Goose.
That'd be awesome. That'd be really cool.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich.
All right.
Appreciate
Take care. John Gibbs joining us, Heritage Foundation. So in case you're wondering, Dutch Goose is a pizza burger place right next to the Stanford campus that a lot of people hang out. One of the best cheeseburgers I've ever had in my life. Anyway, John Gibbs joining us here on Richmond's Morning News. That was pretty cool. That was really cool. All right. So again, when we ask these big questions, you get different answers. That's what Michael Greer does. He asks, why in the world are we doing this? Why in the world are you doing that?